Step into the unknown with Paranormal M. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay updated with our latest perplexing tales. We hope you enjoy the adventure. Trade School Ghost Encounter. I graduated from Rankin Technical College last year with an associate's degree in precision machining. Basically, that just means that my job is to make things out of metal by cutting and drilling it. There was a machine shop on campus for students to learn how to operate machining equipment. The entire building was built in 1912. There was always a creepy vibe to the place, especially the machine shop. On a fairly hot day in June, I was in the shop. I was operating a milling machine. As far as I was aware, I was the only person in the shop. I noticed the air suddenly got cold. Couldn't have been the AC turning on because it's been broken for decades. Something wasn't right. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a figure walking towards me. When I turned to look at it, I was only able to make out its height and overall shape. For a split second, I saw an 8-foot-tall, pitch-black figure slowly walking towards me. It had no face. It was extremely thin. Had long, skinny legs. In an instant, the figure quickly faded away. It left chills down my spine, even to this day. Later that day, I found out that a faculty member died of a heart attack in the machine shop, roughly 20 years ago. I imagine his soul returned to the shop in an effort to finish the job that he needed to do. For an employee, that is above and beyond. I was raised in a haunted house. I was born in a Victorian terraced house. Had my mom, my dad, 2 older brothers. When I was about 7, I was walking down the attic stairs. They were in a spiral. That's when I turned to face the landing and I saw an old man leaning against the banisters about 2 meters in front of me. He had blood running down his face and on his shirt. I screamed. I didn't even think about ghosts. Thought we had a real person in our house. Parents ran up the stairs and found me in a bit of a state, calmed me down and explained that they knew about him. Apparently, when they moved in, they would see a white figure walking along the landing from downstairs. In the lounge, you could look up onto the hallway landing upstairs. They thought one of my brothers was out of bed, so I would check, and they weren't. They purposefully didn't tell my brothers in case it scared them, but eventually they saw it too. You'd also hear him walking up and down the attic stairs. They were old, and every step had a distinctly unique sound. You could literally tell what part of the stairs somebody was on just by their sound. And at the bottom, you'd hear a loud, hollow thump. Anyway, I was the only one who saw the man in detail. Everybody else saw him as a white figure. I saw him once more close up, and then only saw him as a white figure after that. My dad asked a man across the street who lived there his whole life about the history of our house. He didn't say anything about a ghost, and the man said that before us, an old couple had lived there. The woman died and the man became an alcoholic. One day a neighbor found him outside the door. He'd tripped up on the curb and smashed his head. He helped him in, put him in a chair. Didn't think it looked too bad, but a few days later he was found dead. We would hear him most nights. I'd have it on my radio all night just to drown him out. He never did anything bad, just appeared now and then and noisily walked up and down. I don't know why, but we never thought of telling anyone. It was normal, he lived there. Shrug. Our neighbors also saw him walking along the landing one day. I was homeschooled for the last year, and my home tutor was there once, and it was only the 2 of us in the house. We heard walking above us. She looked up and asked if one of my brothers had come home. I told her it was just the ghost, and she looked pretty freaked out. Left early and refused to tutor me without somebody else there. I moved out when I was 19 and my parents sold it a few years later. I dream about the house still after 23 years, pretty much every few days. It's like I'm linked to it, maybe because I was born in it. Anyway, sorry it's so long, but this is what got me interested in the subject. I've had a few more experiences at other times since this, but this is the main one. Just thought I'd add because it's weird, but I spoke perfectly fine before I saw him. And ever since that moment, I've had a debilitating stutter. Seen many speech therapists through the years, but no use. Apparently the Hat Man is a thing. So I was watching a Smosh video about spooky Reddit stories, and the first story was a shadow prank one. Or shower. I decided to look up the post, because I'm into that shit. Left the tab open. I left a comment on the YouTube video about something I saw when I was younger. Then I decided to browse this subreddit while the video played. ADHD anyone? I then read the title. Ever seen a shadow man in a fedora and a trench coat? Not gonna lie, I was a bit shook. When I moved into the apartment I currently live in, everything was fine. Except I'd see a shadow in front of my bedroom door. Not all the time, it was mostly if it was at least somewhat dark. I wasn't ever able to make out many details no matter how close I got. It was almost like that thing in Black Mirror where you kind of block a person and then from then on all you see is static noise from a TV with no reception in the shape of that person. But it was clearly the shape of a tall, not hugely, just a bit taller than average man. He was wearing a hat and had a long coat. Mind you, I'm South American, so it's not really common to see people wearing long coats like that. I never interacted with the shadow. Sometimes I'd feel uneasy, but I'd deliberately try to think of something else and ignore it. Especially since it was so hard to make out what it looked like. But it never really did anything. It was always in front of my bedroom door, though, so I'd have to cross paths with it to get in and out, and my apartment's kind of like a long corridor. The front door is immediately followed by the kitchen door on the right, then the living room, then what used to be my mom's bedroom door, then my bedroom door. The bathroom is at the end of the hall with its door facing the entrance door at the other end. I'm just saying this to explain that when I'm in my room looking out, there's only a blank white wall. Nothing that could be mistaken for the shape of a person. Only one high school friend of mine confirmed that she could see it too. Everybody else just dismissed it or thought I was making it up. Granted, that friend was considered to be very woo-woo, spiritual, super, into Wicca and all that. She may have been influenced by the fact that I told her about the shadow before she saw it. She was really creeped out, though. She used to ask us to use a detour coming home from school when she was walking with us to avoid a cemetery. That was because she would kind of feel the presence of spirits and they would try to follow her. Anyway, I never saw the shadow's eyes or smile. Never said anything to me that I could hear. I could never make out the color of his coat. I never thought about what the hat was, a fedora or not. But it was definitely a tall man with a hat and a long coat. A while after, I don't remember how long, but I noticed it wasn't there anymore. I didn't do anything, it was just gone. Never had anything like that happen again in this apartment. Though I did have a small, stupid sort of premonition once. But I guess that has nothing to do with the location. Friend's account of a woman in the woods. However, my late best friend who passed away over 20 years ago when we were 19, they once told me about the following encounter that she had. I'd like to see if anybody has any similar experiences or sightings. She told me that when she was 7 or 8, she and her dad were napping on a big pallet after watching a movie in their living room. It was the middle of the day on a weekend. Their living room, in which her dad still lives, has big glass panes on one wall that's overlooking the back patio. The house sits on some significant acreage in bushy woods in central Texas. No neighbors within at least a half a mile, likely more. Anyway, my friend said that she woke up from a nap to see a woman standing right outside a big window covered in rags or possibly pelts. They had leaves and twigs in their hair. I think she described her as old, but I can't remember with absolute certainty. As my friend looked at her, the woman started opening her mouth, and it just kept getting wider and wider, well beyond normal human capabilities. She shook her dad awake and screamed for him to look out the window. And when they both looked, she was gone. She swore it wasn't a dream, and her dad didn't even believe her, of course, but I did. And I still do. She was my soul sister, and I knew when she was being truthful. Anybody have any ideas? I've looked into Baba Yaga and various force tags, but the widening mouth never seemed to be a distinct feature of anything I've come across over the years. Haunted house. When I was 6 months old in 1981, my late parents purchased a 2-bedroom cottage that had been empty for about 2 years. It was in a somewhat dilapidated state, like broken windows, holes in the floorboards, all that. Basically, it looked like a stereotypical haunted house. For my understanding, it had been lived in by an old lady who had died, and then it had been left to fall apart, which was the case with a lot of old cottages and farms between the 80s and 90s. The cottage next door had also been recently purchased, and it was also dilapidated. The cottage was about 200 years old. It was located in a village about 8 miles north of the city of Bristol. It was in the county of Gloucestershire. That's located in the southwest region of England, about 123 miles southwest of London. My parents spent about 4 years renovating the house so we could move in. Until then, we lived 7 miles away in a flat about 5 miles outside of Bristol. While my parents were renovating the house, they experienced a few strange encounters. Each morning before work, my father would drop me and my mother off at the house in the morning, go to work at about maybe 7 miles away. My mother would take me to the village school. That was about a half a mile away, too, then go back to the house and renovate what she could. After work, my father would then collect us, take us back to the flat and go back to the house to continue working into the evening. This went on for about 3 years. The number of times when my parents were working in the house, they experienced the sense of being watched. And they weren't alone. They would hear footsteps upstairs, doors open or close. My mother once heard heavy disembodied breathing. Our family dog would also stare where there was nothing visible. My parents didn't really massively adjust the house layout as a later owner would. However, they added a 3rd bedroom and a bathroom near the rear of the house. It had been on a sloping, pitched roof. They also added a landing, so that way you could access all 3 bedrooms and the bathroom. Previously, you had to go up the stairs, through the bedroom and then through the bedroom, or through the bedroom and then through that bedroom to get to the 2nd master bedroom. It's a lot of bedrooms. Oh no. Oh no. So, my bedroom was the new bedroom that was added to the rear of the house. Previously, this had just been empty attic space above the kitchen. I never liked this bedroom. I always felt watched, but there was a cold spot in this room. In the mid-1980s, roughly, my aunt came to stay with us. And as her parents, I guess you could say my paternal grandparents, they were in the 2nd bedroom. She had to stay on the bottom bunk bed. One night, she would hear the door open and close. A while later, the bunk bed started to shake violently. She told me to stop it, thinking it was me. Then, realizing I was asleep, shouted, "Whatever you are, just stop." And it did. In the late 1980s, I changed bedrooms to the front so I could have more space. The rear bedroom became the spare, or guest bedroom. I was lucky enough to have both sets of grandparents, and even know 2 great-grandparents. Something my children won't ever experience. My parents were from the north of England in Yorkshire, about 3 hours drive away. So every few months at different times, various relations would just visit and stay with us, usually on a weekend. My late maternal grandmother had a few experiences. One time in the 90s, staying in the rear bedroom. She woke up to see the shadow of a woman in a Victorian Edwardian bonnet. It was stood at the bottom of the bed. Can't recall what else happened, but I think it vanished. Another experience she had was about 2001. She was washing up in the kitchen in front of the kitchen window. Behind her were the stairs. She turned around and saw the shape of a faded lady figure gliding up the stairs, turned left on the landing and going to the spare bedroom, my former bedroom. My late mother had a number of experiences in the 1980s and 90s. She was in bed one evening and my father was downstairs watching the TV in the living room. She heard heavy breathing, like from an elderly person. The next moment she felt as though she was lifted off the bed and headed toward the window. She was scared that she was going to get thrown out. The next moment she glided back down onto the bed. As soon as she hit the bed mattress, she jumped up and ran downstairs and got my father. He ran upstairs to their bedroom and heard a loud sigh, which made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Another experience my mom had was she was lying down on the sofa. She could see through to the next room and a little sitting room, and she could see the kitchen door. The next moment it slammed shut. My dog, who was in the little sitting room, ran into the living room with a scared look in his face. My mother sadly died in 1999. My own experiences were mostly in my front bedroom. I remember in the 80s when I had a bunk bed, being on the top bunk with it being to the left of the door. The door opened and I turned around. I was thinking it was my mother. There was no one there. The door promptly, slowly closed by itself. They're the type of doors which have a latch and a button, so the wind or draft can't even open them. In the 90s, I remember opening the door to be hit by a gust of cold air from nowhere. 2 nights after my mother's death, I recall a very vivid experience talking to my mother, and to this day I don't know if it was real or a dream. Never had anything like it before or since, really. About a year or 2 after my mother's death, my father experienced what looked like 2 orbs in his bedroom floating about. He felt that he was being embraced. Around 2002, my father started dating. He would stay with his girlfriend, who would be my stepmom later, about 2 hours away most weekends. I was left in the house alone as my dog had died in 2001. I would often hear walking about upstairs. I spend most of my time in my room at my computer, talking to my girlfriend, who is my wife now. I don't think much else happened after this point. Not that I remember. Around May of 2003, my father sold the house and moved about an hour away. While I moved nearer to Bristol. My father got remarried in 2003 and died in 2016. I understand since we left the house 21 years ago, it's had about 5 other owners. The longest living there was about 8 or 9 years. Haven't really been back since or checked if there's still activity going on with any current or past owners. I lived in and around Bristol for another 15 years. That was until 5 years ago when we moved to Wales. Another country, but like England, part of the UK and Britain. About an hour away, so we didn't go out that much anymore. When we lived in Bristol, we would occasionally drive through the village, but as my relationship with my father deteriorated around the same time after my mother died, it was never really the same. Something I don't relish revisiting. Hope you enjoyed my true story of a house that I lived in for the better part of 20 years. Sorry some of the details are vague. It's all over 21 plus years now. And with the exception of myself and my aunt, everyone else who's experienced paranormal activity, my parents and grandparents, they've all been dead for years. I'm pretty estranged from my living relations, so there isn't anyone to get clarification from. The recounted experiences above happened between 81 and 2003. sometimes days, weeks, or months or years apart. I'm sure there's probably more, but a lot of things from this time I've just forgotten. I have had a few experiences in the 5 other houses that I've lived in, but nothing noteworthy like my original cottage. I've added some photos of my house, but these are from the estate agents when I was looking up and it was for sale about 5 years ago. The house was significantly altered by the first owner after us, 2003, 2007. Stray cat that me or my daughters regularly feed seemed to have changed overnight. We first discovered him like 2 weeks ago sleeping under a car. He wasn't spooked, but was also shy and kept his distance. We gave him some food, and once he had his, walked away. A few days later he returned. We'd feed him again. I'd try to grab him and pick him up, but he'd get agitated. Didn't hiss or try to claw me, but he'd ball up and let out like this stressed-out whine. So I'll leave him alone. I saw him Friday evening. He returned on Saturday, but was different. He's a white cat with red spots who seemed somewhat underweight, and his fur is kind of spiky. Now his fur is completely soft and smooth. Eyes look brighter and he looks perfectly healthy. I swear he even looks bigger all in under 24 hours. He also isn't leaving anymore. Like once he ate on Saturday, he seemingly spent all night sleeping nearby as he'd pop up this morning and open the gate. Tonight he basically became the house gargoyle. He jumped to the top of our gate and just made himself comfortable and kept looking outside. Only looking back in the direction of the house when he'd hear the door open. Now he lets me pick him up and hold him, which is great because it means I can take him to the vet when I get a chance this week. But I cannot overstate how he seemed to have gotten to glow up from one day to the next. I'm not sure if the vet will even believe me when I tell him this cat looked a lot more sickly just a few days ago. Guardian Angel. I had a broad daylight public experience. It was about 7 or 8 years ago at work. I was working primarily at a burn table and a laser cutting table programmer operator for a small steel supplier that also did some custom work. Customers could bring in metals to have us cut them and weld whatever was needed. We also had materials that we purchased from scrapyards that we would sort through and organize to resell as used material. It was some of this used material that I was doing some final work on that day. I don't remember why, but I had kind of just set it in the middle of the dirt road. That was one of the 2 that went to the shop, and the other side was for customers and our own trucks to use, really, but I had to weld a lifting eye onto the face of this used plate. And then I would pick it up with a crane for the customer to drive under for loading. This was a small company in Arkansas. Some of our methods were questionable. As soon as I flipped my welding hood down and struck an arc, it felt and sounded like a gust of wind being, hitting me about a second. It only took a couple of gusts for me to raise my hood and look in the direction it was coming from because it was so strong and sudden that it surprised me. Thought maybe somebody was fanning me with a big piece of cardboard or something, but there was no one around. I chalked it up to just a random wind gust blowing through the building and went back to welding. But the instant I struck an arc again, the gusts were there, were hitting me so hard they were pushing my body in the hood so that I was swaying back and forth. I stopped, flipped my hood up again, and everything was dead still. This dirt road was half pea gravel and half fine dust from so many vehicles driving over it for the last 50 years. The yard outside in the direction the wind was coming from was about the same size. Any time there was a gust of wind, this floury dust would roll through the shop, and you'd have to look over the other way to keep from getting a face full. This time, though, there wasn't a speck in the air. It was dead still. It started to feel like something really was odd at this point. So I looked around to see if I could see anybody and make eye contact with them and ask if they were seeing this. They were just too far away and looked the other direction. I decided that whatever it was, I was just going to finish my weld, and that it surely was done since I had looked around for a good little while. There was no breeze to speak of. It would be too big a coincidence if it were to start up again as soon as I started welding for the third time. But of course, that's exactly what it did. I pushed through, holding myself steady while crouched down and welding to keep the wind from making my hands unsteady while trying to lay down a proper weld bead. For whatever reason, this wind, it wasn't blowing my welding gas away and ruining my weld. I finished the weld and then flipped my hood up real quick, see if I could see anything out of the ordinary. But all that happened was the gust stopping the instant I was done. Everything was dead still again, not a speck of dust in the air. The impression I got was as though there was something large and winged that was blowing gusts at me with this slow, powerful wing beat. The only thing I can imagine is that maybe what I was welding was like poisonous when heated, since it was used metal and unknown substance on it, maybe, but... Or maybe I had a guardian angel pushing the fumes away from me as I welded. I wasn't under the influence of any drugs, no alcohol. I was wide awake and doing my job in the middle of a sunny day, and these were powerful gusts. And when I say they instantly started or stopped along with me welding or not, I don't mean like it started a long weld and the gusts begin within a minute of it. I mean it starts and stops the beginning of the weld, and then the gusts were within a half second each time. Is my room at my parents' house haunted? So my parents' house is really old. I believe my great-grandparents built it. At least I know for sure that they lived in this house. My room used to be the kitchen, and my closet we used for storage, but later as a little room for desk work too. When we were little, my sister and I shared a room, and we were a bit afraid of that small room which used to be used for storage. One morning when I was around 4 or 5, my sister had already left for school. I heard a voice out of that room calling my name. I was afraid, but I didn't want to be afraid. So I told myself it was just a dream. Never heard that voice again, but when I got older, I often found things in places I didn't put them. Maybe slightly in a different position. Thought it was my sister, but she said that she never touched it. My sister moved out of her room, it got worse. Things fell down from shelves without any explainable reason. Most of the time, it was always the same thing from the same shelf. Then there's the living room thing. Our living room has a glass in its door, so you can look into the corridor which leads from my room to the kitchen and downstairs. My mom and I often saw a shadowy thing kind of coming out of my room. I'm gonna move out in about a year, and I haven't noticed anything unusual ever since I've talked to my mom and boyfriend about what's happened. The only thing is that I feel watched every often in my room, rather very often, especially from the room which was used for storage, but it's now my closet. Also, when I walk through the corridor, I often feel watched from downstairs. I've had sleep paralysis a few times and wondered if it could be caused by paranormal activities as well. Am I just being paranoid, or could my great-grandmother still be looking over her family? Thought about her wanting to say goodbye since my room was her kitchen, but I never knew her. I haven't ever seen a picture of her, so I don't really see a reason for that. Is my house exerting negative energy onto me and my family? To preface this, I'm typically not a believer in anything paranormal. However, I'm not totally opposed to the realm of paranormal either. This is probably because I've had many unexplained encounters and phenomena. I just almost always attribute things to being something natural. Anyway, I live in a home where the previous owner died in one of the rooms. It's nothing foul that I'm aware of, and I'm pretty sure it was from natural causes. My grandmother was a firm believer in the supernatural and read cards, playing cards that predicted future events and whatnot, and I don't know anything about it, except for the few times I had mine read. Her son died from an unexpected aneurysm in his 20s, and left her, my mother, and my great-grandmother. She frequently received visits in dreams and multiple other instances of crazy things happening. Her and my great-grandmother lived in another house on the same property. My great-grandma died of old age. My grandma, however, died suddenly around her birthday. It was back in 2021. She died from a freak seizure, which subsequently led to a coma. She didn't even have a history of major health issues, and this can still be chalked up to just a freak incident, I guess. But the day of my high school graduation, that's like maybe 2023. Our basement flooded and we remodeled. I moved into the basement, and over the past year, I've been very sick. I've had COVID a couple times now. I had this along with a severe case of mono. I've also had bad issues with anxiety and derealization, none of which I've ever encountered in my life. We've had many instances of bad luck and misfortune, and I feel as if my house is oppressive and toxic. In the past 5 or 10 years, we've had maybe 12 or 15 bats in the home, which are oddly timed around important events and happenings in our lives. We've had many strange and distressing things happen while living here, but mine and my family's health is impacted the most. Is there a supernatural aggressor, or is it all just bad luck? Ask Reddit. It was a few months ago, and I'd just moved into my new student house with a few friends. They'd all gone home for a few days because it was summer break, but I stayed there. So there I was home alone, and it was awesome for the first day or two. Then things started to get a bit weird. For example, a small thing had been moved, like some of my notes or like the TV remote. I just assumed that it could have been the wind or something. The next few days, I'd started to hear noises in the night. Not like loud noises, more like small whispers, as if somebody was in the house trying to be quiet. I just thought it was my brain playing tricks on me. The night after that, I heard a door slam. When I say slam, it woke me the fuck up. And I was like sleeping like the dead, so I got up, started freaking out because the bathroom light was on. The light switch is in the inside of the bathroom. I went to try and open the door, and it was locked, and the light was turned off, and the door unlocked. So no one was there, but I screamed and hid underneath the covers for the rest of the night. And needless to say, I stayed up all night because, well, I basically went home with my parents for a few days until the other guys came back when I explained it to them. They called bullshit. Nothing has happened since. My heart still races. I will open by saying that I've always been very spiritually sensitive. I'm a Christian and I've witnessed demonic activity several times. I've always been very in tune with the vibes in a room that I walk into. I was 11, and I was on a missions trip in Salt Lake City. We were having a great time. We were fixing up a church and cleaning up a very impoverished neighborhood. I was enjoying myself, meeting other kids and playing soccer. That's when I wasn't given any more tasks. When it came to dinner, our host took us to many different types of restaurants. The goal was to give us cultural food experiences and get to know members of the community in which we were staying. One particular evening, we were taken to an Indian food restaurant. We were very excited as we'd never tried food like this before. But I had no idea what was coming. When I entered the building, I was immediately knocked on my back. Instantaneously, with no warning, I was stunned. I was trying to process what was happening. It felt as though I'd been slugged. I remember one of the older women acting as my guardian, as my parents hadn't come on this trip. They were reaching down to help me up. I felt as though I couldn't breathe. The room was suffocating and my heart raced like I'd been running hard. I'll never forget the absolutely ugly, dirty feeling that consumed me. Somehow they got me on my feet and sat me at the table. I need to leave this place. All of the adults were looking at one another uneasily as well. I began to hear muffled screaming in my mind. Immediately I had tears streaming down my cheeks. One of the other parents helped me outside for some fresh air. The moment I stepped over the doorway, every bad vibe was stripped from me. I felt exhausted and uneasy. I just kept telling them that I wasn't going back in there. They ended up taking us to a pizza place instead. Took us to another authentic Indian cuisine place the next day. Went great. Turns out I have a love for curry. But something about the first restaurant still leaves my heart racing after all of those years. There was something evil about that place. Something not right. Haven't had a chance to go back to that city again, but maybe someday I will and try to pray over that restaurant. I was too young back then to understand fully what was happening. But now I just get the feeling something in there did not want me to spend any time there. Ominous light emanating from room with strange sleep talking. A few nights ago, my friend slept over at my house. I am notorious for taking in my sleep, or talking, particularly having night terrors and saying some concerning things in my sleep, despite not really ever having nightmares. All of my friends and family are aware of my sleep talking and yelling. It's just really never been concerning. Just something anybody sleeping at the same bed as me had to anticipate and ignore. However, a few nights ago when my friend slept over in the middle of the night, she was woken up by me repeatedly saying in my sleep, "But they have to see. Let them see and open their eyes." This wouldn't be so concerning if it weren't for the weird glow of light emanating from my side of the room that was casting a light all over the other side of the bedroom. She thought I might be awake and on my phone, but when she leaned over, I was fast asleep, no phone in sight. My bedroom windows are completely closed. The blinds are stuck down in the window so no light gets in. I'm a light sleeper and the sound of the blinds moving when my overhead fan is on overstimulates me, so I glue-tack them down. Regardless, it was like 3 a.m., so no sunlight. According to her, the light didn't look like it was coming from a window. It was emanating from my side of the room, despite no light possible being able to get in. It lasted for at least a minute. My phone was away, and the glow was too bright and covering the whole room to be from my tiny covered window. When she went straight back to sleep after, I have no recollection of the event as I don't remember any of my sleep talks. The event was really bizarre. I can't find a possible explanation for what happened. If anybody has some sort of reasonable explanation other than a spiritual being appearing in my room, it would calm my nerves. Disappearing man in the road. Had something weird happen when I left work today at around 4 a.m. There's one stretch of road I take home that's usually especially devoid of people at that time of night. It's a 4-lane road with a turning lane down the middle. All that's on this road, and it's like a small airport on the side and essentially a swamp on the other. I turn onto this road driving like normal, fully paying attention really, because sometimes deer like to jump out and around there, so it's completely empty, no other cars in sight. Totally straight road with no curves. And the best way I can describe it's like a man just materialized out of thin air walking in the center. They were in the turning lane about 10 feet ahead of me. There's no way on earth I would have seen him sooner with my absolutely bright headlights and absolutely nothing else around. I didn't get a great look at him since he showed up so suddenly, and by the time I even registered it in my brain, I was already flying past him. All I could tell was that it looked like a middle-aged older black man with a red jacket on. Had maybe one of those wheeled suitcases or bags, and he was kind of dragging it behind him. I hit the brakes and was looking for him in my mirrors just because, well, he was very close to my car. I was scared I'd hit the guy or something. Didn't see anything or anyone at all behind me. As fast as he appeared, he was gone. I ended up pulling a U-turn because I wanted to make sure I wasn't losing my mind. And keep in mind, there's absolutely nowhere for this guy to have gone in 30 seconds it took me to slow down and turn around. On one side of the road, there's a fence around the airport runway. The other is an empty gravel lot in a ditch. There was no man anywhere. Anyway, either I lost my mind, as I first thought, or there's ghost hitchhikers. Think I'm being haunted. I've seen figures, normally black shadows, most of my life. The earliest beings was when I was around 5. That's when I would be in the car and I'd see a man in just like a checkered shirt standing on a path. When I'd turn to look at him again, he'd be gone. However, lately, I've been seeing more black figures more often, especially when I'm at my boyfriend's. One day I was there by myself, and his door opened, which was locked. No one came in. About 30 minutes after my boyfriend came back, and I was talking to him, I saw the figure walk past. His grandpa, who he lives with, said that he's also seen it. A couple of weeks later, me and my boyfriend were about to watch Escape Room, and we put the remote to one side, and about 2 minutes later the film switched on. So I jumped under the covers only to feel cold. Then I felt as though I was being pinned down by my legs and I couldn't move. Over the past week, I haven't been at my boyfriend's. I've been home, but we do FaceTime every night. And when the other day, he messaged during the day asking who was in the room, thinking I was cheating on him. Well, there was no one in my room, and the next night he asked the same question, and again no one's in the room. He kept saying that my breathing kept changing, and it was like I was trying to be quiet. I was fast asleep. The next 2 nights I slept with my lights on and nothing happened. The next night I thought I'd try again without any lights, only I woke up to my boyfriend saying my name and telling me to show me who's in the room. Put my light on half asleep and showed him no one was there. In the morning I asked him about it and he said that he'd seen someone in my bed. He then said that when I put my light on later it looked like my hair was pulled. I moved my head and looked back and opened my eye and closed it again. He screen recorded it on FaceTime. So when I woke up this morning, my light wasn't on. Thought I'd switched it off, but he said that I hadn't, and in the video you can see that it's on. Tonight I'm sleeping with the lights on and having him screen record the full time. I'm just praying he's seeing things. Slippery slope. Family holiday to an old Welsh cottage. So it was around 10 or 11 years ago that me and my whole family, roughly the 15 of us, set out on the road of our family holiday in the Welsh countryside. I was maybe 15 or 16, going out in the middle of nowhere to a converted row of cottages that had been renovated for renting for holiday makers like ourselves. It was a big farmhouse. It was pretty lush, to be honest. The farmhouse is right at the top of a very steep hill with winding roads and particularly breathtaking views. So we arrive at said cottage. The whole family has drove for the better part of 3.5 hours to get here. It was pretty late in the day, but still daylight as it was the height of the British summertime. So, as you naturally do, you unload your cases and your shopping bags and start to get settled in, getting a feel for the place that you're staying. So as I said earlier, this farmhouse was originally 3 or 4 separate cottages that had been knocked through. It was made into one big house. As you walked through the front door, there was a huge staircase that one at the top could swing a left or right to gain access to both sides of the house with rooms down on either side. So the first encounter, shall we say, was spotted by my eagle-eyed uncle on the first day. Everyone had unpacked and sat outside enjoying the last of the sun before it set. My uncle had a room to the left of the house. As drinks were flowing, so was bathroom breaks. So as my uncle got up to use the bathroom, he walked up towards his ensuite, and at the end of the hallway on the wall was a framed picture with a glass front. As he was walking down the hallway, he spotted a reflection in the glass picture behind him. It entered one of the other bedrooms behind where he had just walked from. Now, not thinking anything of it because it could have been anybody, he carried out his business and headed back outside. He asked the family if anybody had followed him upstairs. Nobody had left but him. Okay, so by this point we've all gone to bed and woke up the next morning feeling fresh. not really experiencing anything out of the ordinary through the night. A few creaks and cracks, but it's expected in an old house. So cut to that afternoon. Some scenario of everybody outside, and my sister-in-law decides she needs the toilet, heads upstairs, walks to the toilet, passing her bedroom. As she passes her bedroom, though, she notices something on the bed, something that she'd never seen before. It was an early children's book that had been opened to a page that had been scribbled on the very back. It was in black ink. And when I say children's book, I don't mean like the ones that we all know. I mean the book was like wooden, straight from the early 1900s. Again, it wasn't until she came back downstairs and asked any of the kids if they'd been playing with one of these books in her room that all my family had said that nobody had been upstairs all afternoon. Okay, so people are starting to get a little bit creeped out, but carry on because our holiday won't be ruined yet. So skip to 4 nights in. People have begun hearing footsteps in the night. It was in the corridors, but in the morning everybody admits they slept through the night and didn't get up at all. Night number 5. Okay, so my parents had the best room in the house, big master bedroom with a double wardrobe right at the end of the corridor. It was around 10 p.m. My dad had gotten out of the shower and hung his wet towel over his wardrobe door to dry out. My family's dog was a pampered pooch, a Staffy. He would sleep on the bed with my parents. Throughout the night, the dog became more and more restless until he stood on the bed and became, and I quote from my dad, shockingly still. The hairs on his back had stood up, arching his back and showing his teeth to what my dad described as a very dark corner of the room. The same corners where the towel had been placed on the wardrobe door. So eventually the dog calms down, returns back to sleep. Cut to morning, where my parents wake up to a towel my dad had placed on the wardrobe door to be perfectly laid in front of the wardrobe like it had been ironed. Not in a heap on the floor, but perfectly flat with no, creases. So, by this point, we decided to do some investigating, see if anybody else had. See if anybody else encountered anything similar to what we'd experienced in the visitor's book. Nothing out of the ordinary until we reached an entry in the book that was dated exactly a year ago to the day that we were staying. It explained that the house was lovely, the views are amazing, but did not account for the extra guests. Safe to say we didn't stay the full week. Attachment. I don't completely remember the age I was when these things started happening, but I was around maybe 6 or 7. One day I was talking to this person. My mom heard me. She asked, "Who are you talking to?" I said, "Jeff," pointed at the thing I was talking to. My mom was really confused as there was no one there, but then she just assumed that it was probably the imaginary friend, since most kids have one. Not long after this incident, something else happened. I had this high chair that I'd put my baby dolls in, and I went to pick something up that was under it. The part you were meant to sit food on, I don't know what it's called. It fell directly on my head, even though that piece was not supposed to be detachable. My mom knew something was off. That's when she began seeing the man I was seeing. She had my dad pray over the house to get rid of this entity, which did work. Or so we thought. When I was 9, I started seeing him again, but I just ignored it and told myself it was all in my head, until my mom told me she just saw him. So not long after my mom and dad divorced, I stayed with my dad most of the time, where this entity stayed. I never stopped seeing it. When I was about 12, I decided to use a spirit box. I wanted to try and communicate with this entity. The first thing I asked was for a name, and immediately I very clearly heard, "It's Jeffrey." I asked what he wanted, and he said, "Friend," which scared me, so I stopped. Fast forward some time, and I went to live with my mom, and Jeffrey followed. My mom immediately knew, and she gave me some salt and told me to put it around all the doors. This helped not one bit. Every time I'd turn my lights off to sleep, I'd see him in the corner at the end of the bed staring at me, I still do sometimes. Jeffrey became more aggressive as I guess he realized we wanted to get rid of him. He would and still sometimes does throw things across my room, maybe move my belongings, and every time I'd go on Spirit Box, he'd cuss me out, call me a bitch and a whore. I've woken up with scratches before, too. I'm now 15 and he's still here. Just not as active, and I don't really know how to get rid of him. I was in the kitchen with my mom not that long ago and the cabinet behind me opened. One of the shelves collapsed, causing multiple wine glasses to fall and shatter at my feet. Yet somehow not a single shard of glass hit me, even though it should have been directly below the cabinet standing. I've told him to leave multiple times, and his response was always, "No, I like you." I can hardly sleep at night because I'm afraid of him, that he'll hurt me again. Also, as I'm writing this, my phone, which is halfway charged still, completely shut off twice. Wouldn't turn back on for like 2 minutes for no reason. I can tell he doesn't want me to put my story out, but I don't know what else to do and I need help. How do I get rid of him? I think my dead father is trying to reach out. Before I state anything, I would just like to hear people's input on it. Take it as you wish. So for context, my dad, who's my best friend, he's honestly the best man I've ever met. So sweet and gentle. Passed away 8 years ago when I was 12 due to a sudden health complication. That wasn't a matter of a day. The day he felt fine, went to work and everything. But as leaving his office, he had a stroke and a few hours later he passed. I loved him to death. Always will. He was my everything. We moved and just kept moving. Eventually moved back to my childhood home. It was because rent's expensive and my mom owns a house. Been living here for 4 years. It's a 3-story house, and the connecting stairs between floors 2 and 3 have a high ceiling with a wall with space for display. We have it full of my father's things. His band tapes, his newspaper headline, portraits of him, and hanging above it one of his paintings. There's only 2 of those in existence. 2 weeks ago around 4 a.m. we're all sleeping. We as in my sibling, my mom, and me. We were awakened by the sudden crash and breaking of glass, with a heavy thump behind it. I owned 2 cats, but they were sleeping with me. And either way it was impossible for them to cause it because the walls are really, really tall. All of us were scared looking around at what caused the sound. We were really surprised to find the source of the disturbance, which we saw glass and a lot of broken portraits on the floor smashed into pieces. The painting had fallen on the stuff and dropped everything, my dad's portraits, his tape, his diploma, everything. Everything except a family portrait of us. Him, my mom, and me and my sibling. That was along with the portrait of me and my brother. Both of these left untouched, not even a scratch, and both in the same position, which makes no sense since everything was below the painting. Me and my family are freaked out because why would everything break and shatter that held so much value to us about our dad? But that family portrait and picture he took of me and my brother didn't. Any thoughts, opinions? How did the painting even fall? It hadn't even twitched in 4 years. Why would it break everything except that? Is it him? What was the message behind it? Just my 2 cents on the thing. Well, maybe he loves you guys, but maybe he's not proud of his artistic work or achievements, or annoyed at people involved with him in those artistic achievements or works. Just a thought. Strange encounter with my dad after he passed away. So this happened in early 2013. My dad very suddenly and unexpectedly passed away on December 21st, 2012. I was 30 years old. When I was growing up, he and I weren't particularly close. We had our fair share of issues and arguments due to his substance abuse problems and alcoholism, but we did grow very close. and had a really great relationship ever since my early 20s. We would literally talk to each other every day, and he'd become a huge part of my life, which I unfortunately didn't realize until after he was gone. Needless to say, I was a mental mess after he passed. There were so many things I wished I had said and done before losing him. One thing I found myself obsessing over, though, was that what he experienced, what it felt like to die and where he was now. It was totally consuming me. About that time, I started having these reoccurring dreams of someone or something chasing me. For about 5 days, I would wake up with my adrenaline racing and heart pounding. After so many nights in a row waking up like that, I was at a point where I just wanted it to end. So the night I had my last reoccurring dream before I went to sleep, I told my husband, I'm saying fuck it. Going to turn around and start chasing whatever's been chasing me in my dreams. Maybe it'll make them stop. Sure enough, I found myself being chased again. Instead of continuously running, I stopped, turned around, and there was something there. Couldn't make out exactly what it was. It was like a big dark shadow. It wasn't in the shape of a person, but more like a big dark cloud. All of a sudden, I realized it was my dad. I was so happy to see him. I told him I loved and missed him so much, and I was crying. And then I said, "Are you okay? What does it feel like?" He walked closer to me and said, "It feels like this." He pushed me backwards. It wasn't in a mean tone, more of like a joking, pranking way. In my dream, I fell back and I had the feeling and sensation of free falling into darkness. Everything was black and there was no ground or bottom or end to the fall. I woke up in my bed that morning, no adrenaline racing or heart pounding, then never had a dream again. I do, however, get dream visits from my dad every now and then, just popping in to say hi. Pile of clothes mimic me. When I was really young, must have been 6 or 8 years old, I couldn't get any sleep. So I asked my mom, who was single at the time, if I could sleep with her. On the left of the door to my mom's room, there was a box of something that I'm not entirely sure what it was. Maybe a pile of washing on top of it. On the right of the door was the bed. My mom allowed me to sleep for the night, but I must sleep on the right-hand side of the bed next to the pile of clothes. So I hop in and I still couldn't really get sleep, so I focus on the pile of clothes and I see like warping and disfigurement. It was almost making me dizzy. I look away for a second and it stopped. I'm thinking, something's not really right. I get bored and start making stupid faces at these clothes. As soon as I realize that I see a face and 2 eyes, I make a happy face and it's happy. I frown, it's sad. At this point, I wasn't scared, but curious. So I tried different emotions, silly faces too, until I thought about sticking my tongue out at it. This is where it gets creepy. I remember that I didn't want to do this, but I had a curiosity and I had to itch it. So I slowly stick my tongue out, and lo and behold, the pile of clothes had mimicked my tongue. It was even a pink color, so I was freaking out. I rushed over screaming and crying, destroying the pile of clothes, explained to my mom. She didn't understand a word I was saying. We both got back to sleep, and I think I felt better after that little burst of rage. Transcommunication in a foreigner's language. So 2 days ago, we were attending a witches' night meeting. It's just an awful lot of New Age shops selling sandalwood sticks that reeked of cat's urine. Some people doing a speech I've heard 1,000 times. When we met with a girl my age who just worked as a waitress in the place that we used to hang out. So long story short, we started talking about Connect equipment and such. Ended up heading to an old ruinous cortijo. A hacienda typical in southern Spain. There were 7 of us. This woman and her Portuguese partner, a family of 3 who claimed to be able to communicate with the other side, my wife who's sensible as well as me. We tried with spirit boxes and spirit radio, also with proximity sensors and some extra stuff. started beeping and flashing and generally going apeshit 5 minutes after we arrived. We got some amazing recordings full of weird noises. As the night got more and more intense, we decided to try with the Ouija. The object flew over the board, and the girls even had to be careful not to lose the rhythm. We men stood aside, looked quite shocked, and suddenly the board started communicating in Portuguese. It said it was an old friend who died by accident, wanted to warn his brother about his life being in grave danger. It provided lots of information unknown to us, and the girl of the couple looked away from the board as she realized what it was all about. That way she wouldn't, interfere without realizing. All the conversation happened in Portuguese, both answers and questions. I could understand most of it with some difficulties, but I knew for sure 2 out of 3 users of the board didn't speak the language, and the third wasn't looking, so I doubt any trickery happened. It was nuts. Has someone like this ever had something like this happen to you? Paranormal stuff when I was a kid. When I was growing up, my family was poor. My dad was single, taking care of 5 kids. So to save money, we moved in with my grandma. Now our grandma's house is where 2 people were murdered, so I think that contributed to the hauntings. I don't know when it started, but as long as I can remember, stuff would happen. I'd get sick really, so I'd stay home quite often. My dad was getting ready for work. My room was right across from the bedroom, so he's brushing his teeth and I'm in bed with a fever, just watching. My bedroom door slammed shut. My dad tried to open the door, and after a little bit it opened up, and he looked at me and asked if I did that. I wasn't even strong enough to get up and keep him from opening the door. He looked around a little bit, opened the door, then went back to brushing his teeth, and it happened again after he got the door open a second time. He just got a shoe and just used it to prop open the door. Other times I'd hear my name being called when I'd be in the shower. My grandma would hear a baby cry. There were no babies in the house. Stuff would fly off the counters. It got so bad that we had to have a priest come and bless the house every couple of months. Everything would settle down for a bit, but the paranormal stuff never went away. One night, me and my 2 brothers and grandma stayed in the living room watching TV all night. We all fell asleep at some point. I'm going to try and explain the layout of the living room real fast, so bear with me. When you open the front door right away, you're in the living room and dining room. If you go straight, you end up in the kitchen that's connected to our downstairs. If you went right, you'd be in the living room. Now, the couch I was laying on had a kitchen around the corner from me, and I would wake up and I'm hearing laughing and somebody walking around. I peeked and I blacked out. Just woke up in my bed and nobody knew how I got there. The next big thing was my dad was downstairs. We had an old basement, and as soon as you went down the stairs, there was a big furnace which you had to go around to get to the other side of the basement. My dad was on the other side of the basement building, and he heard some, person or something come down the stairs. Thought it was one of us playing with him. So about 5 minutes maybe he's playing peekaboo with something, and eventually he gets up because whoever it was wasn't responding. He goes behind the furnace and no one's there. He comes upstairs and asks my mom where we are, and we're all outside playing tag. Not one of us was inside the house. Not too long after we moved out, we got our place, but yeah, that's our story. I don't know what it was or if it had any bad intentions, but we all talk about it every now and then. We all get together to make sure we weren't just imagining things. If you had anything similar happen, let me know. And again, sorry if my grammar's bad. I've always been bad at writing. Try my best and respond if anybody has any questions. Thanks for listening, guys. See ya.